Pearl Harbor was already burning after Wave 1 and 2. Wave 3 was loaded and ready to wipe out the entire Pacific Fleet, and one single decision stopped it. December 7, 1941, had already cemented itself in history as a day of infamy. The sun rose over Oahu with an eerie calm, masking the chaos that would unfold within hours. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft descended upon the unsuspecting U.S. Pacific Fleet. In less than 2 hours, 353 planes struck the heart of American naval power, sinking battleships, obliterating aircraft, and killing over 2,400 Americans. The harbor became an inferno, smoke rising into the sky, sirens wailing, sailors scrambling amid twisted metal and burning oil. The devastation was catastrophic. The USS Arizona erupted in a massive fireball when a bomb penetrated her forward magazine, killing 1,177 men in seconds. The USS Oklahoma capsized, trapping over 400 sailors in her hull. By 9:45 a.m., when the second wave concluded, 8 battleships lay damaged or destroyed, and American air power in Hawaii was virtually eliminated. But what few Americans knew, and what history would later reveal, was that a third wave of attack had been fully prepared. 54 bombers and 36 fighters sat ready on Japanese carrier decks, their targets meticulously planned. The massive oil storage tanks holding 4.5 million barrels of fuel, the irreplaceable dry docks, the submarine base, and the repair facilities that kept the fleet operational. These were not flashy targets like battleships, but they were the bloodline of naval warfare in the Pacific. Had this third wave struck, the U.S. Pacific Fleet would have been paralyzed for years. Without fuel reserves, ships couldn't sail. Without dry docks, the only 3 in the entire Pacific capable of servicing battleships, damaged vessels couldn't be repaired. Without the repair facilities and machine shops, the Navy's ability to maintain its fleet would have evaporated. It was a strike that could have fundamentally altered the course of World War II. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had designed the operation to deliver a knockout blow. Operating from his flagship Nagato in Japan, Yamamoto understood that crippling America's infrastructure was just as critical as sinking her ships. The detailed plans for Wave 3 reflected this strategic vision, destroying not just the fleet, but the ability to rebuild it. But the decision to launch Wave 3 fell not to Yamamoto, but to Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commander of the 6th Carrier Strike Force, positioned 230 miles north of Oahu. And at approximately 10 a.m., with his aircraft ready and crews briefed, Nagumo made a choice that would echo through history. He ordered, "Cease operations, recover aircraft, prepare to withdraw." 3 words that changed everything. Prepare to withdraw. The reasons behind Nagumo's decision remain debated among historians, but several factors weighed heavily on his mind. First, and most critically, the location of America's aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga, remained unknown. These carriers were Yamamoto's primary targets, yet none were in port during the attack. Enterprise was returning from Wake Island, Lexington was en route to Midway, and Saratoga was in San Diego. For Nagumo, the missing carriers represented an invisible threat. At any moment, American aircraft carriers could appear and catch his fleet vulnerable while recovering planes from a third strike. Second, his pilots reported increasingly effective anti-aircraft fire. The element of surprise was gone. American gunners, initially caught off guard, had organized a defensive barrage that made subsequent attacks far more dangerous. Nagumo had already lost 29 aircraft and valuable, irreplaceable pilots. The prospect of losing more in a third wave against alerted defenses was daunting. Third, fuel concerns loomed large. The strike force had traveled over 3,000 miles to reach Hawaii. The return journey, potentially fighting off counterattacks, required careful fuel management. Lingering in Hawaiian waters for another strike increased the risk exponentially. Yet history would prove this decision catastrophically short-sighted for Japan. Back in Pearl Harbor, the aftermath was apocalyptic. Fires raged across the harbor, fed by thousands of gallons of leaking fuel oil. Sailors fought desperately to rescue trapped comrades. On the capsized Oklahoma, rescuers could hear banging from inside the hull. Men still alive in air pockets, slowly running out of oxygen. Over the next 72 hours, only 32 would be cut free. The rest perished entombed in their ship. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Nurses and doctors worked without rest, treating burns, shrapnel wounds, and shock. Makeshift morgues appeared across the base. The scale of death and destruction seemed incomprehensible. Yet amid the horror, certain strategic realities became apparent. The oil tanks, gleaming white cylinders visible from miles away, stood untouched. Each tank held hundreds of thousands of barrels of fuel oil, collectively representing 6 months of Pacific Fleet operations. Their destruction would have forced the Navy to rely on tankers bringing fuel from the West Coast, a journey of thousands of miles that would have delayed every operation. The dry docks remained operational. These massive facilities, capable of lifting battleships entirely out of water for repairs, were engineering marvels that took years to construct. Only 3 existed in the entire Pacific. Without them, damaged ships would have required the arduous journey to West Coast facilities if they could make the trip at all. The submarine base, relatively untouched, would prove vital. While battleships grabbed headlines, it would be American submarines that would strangle Japan's maritime lifelines, sinking over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping throughout the war. The repair facilities, machine shops, and industrial infrastructure, the unglamorous but essential backbone of naval operations, survived intact. Cranes, welding equipment, electrical systems, spare parts inventories, and the skilled workers who operated them all remained ready to begin the massive task of salvaging and rebuilding the fleet. Most critically, the aircraft carriers survived. Though this was largely due to their absence during the attack rather than the canceled third wave, their survival would define the Pacific War. Within 6 months, these carriers would deliver one of history's most decisive naval victories. In the days following the attack, American forces moved with remarkable speed and determination. Salvage operations began immediately. The Nevada, which had made a dramatic but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to escape the harbor during the attack, was refloated. The California and West Virginia, both sunk in shallow water, would be raised, repaired, and returned to service. Even the Tennessee and Maryland, trapped by sunken ships, would be freed and restored. The intact infrastructure made all of this possible. Workers labored around the clock, using the very facilities that Wave 3 would have destroyed. Ships that might have been total losses became salvageable. Damaged aircraft were repaired and returned to service. The Navy's ability to project power across the Pacific, while severely damaged, was not destroyed. American intelligence began piecing together what had happened. Reports from reconnaissance flights and analysis of Japanese radio traffic revealed the scope of the attack force: 6 carriers, the largest concentration of naval aviation ever assembled. But they also revealed that the attack had ended earlier than expected. Questions emerged. Why had the Japanese withdrawn? Had they accomplished all objectives? What had been left undamaged? As these answers became clear, American commanders realized how close they had come to complete catastrophe and how narrowly they had escaped it. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japanese commanders debated the decision. Some officers argued that Nagumo had made a catastrophic mistake. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the first wave, later wrote that failing to launch the third wave was Japan's most serious error. The fuel tanks alone, he argued, should have been a priority target. Captain Minoru Genda, the operations tactical planner, believed the carrier should have been hunted relentlessly, regardless of risk. But Nagumo's caution reflected a broader Japanese strategic mindset. The attack had been conceived as a preemptive strike to buy time for Japan's southern expansion, capturing oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, rubber in Malaya, and establishing a defensive perimeter. It was never intended to completely destroy American power, which most Japanese leaders knew was impossible. The goal was to delay American response for 6 to 12 months while Japan consolidated its conquests. From this perspective, Nagumo had accomplished his mission. He had delivered a devastating blow, bought Japan precious time, and preserved his strike force. The missing carriers, while concerning, seemed like a problem for another day. This proved to be a fatal miscalculation.
Within months, the United States began its counteroffensive. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 marked the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft. No surface ships even sighted each other. The Japanese advance on Port Moresby was halted, and while technically a tactical draw, it was a strategic American victory. Then came Midway. On June 4–7, 1942, just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy ambushed a Japanese carrier force northwest of Midway Atoll. In one devastating day, American dive bombers sank 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Japan's carrier striking power, carefully built over decades, was shattered in minutes. Crucially, 3 American carriers participated: Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown. These were the ships that survived Pearl Harbor. These were the carriers whose fuel came from the tanks Nagumo didn't destroy. These were the aircraft that launched from bases whose repair facilities remained intact. The direct line from the canceled third wave to Midway was undeniable. The human dimension of these events cannot be overstated. Sailors who survived Pearl Harbor went on to fight across the Pacific, at Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Their survival hinged partially on infrastructure that remained operational, allowing for faster medical treatment and evacuation. Engineers and dock workers using the facilities Wave 3 would have destroyed repaired ships in record time. The Pennsylvania, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Nevada all returned to active service, participating in crucial battles. Even the West Virginia, which had sunk to the harbor bottom, was raised, modernized, and fought at Leyte Gulf. The industrial might of the United States, already formidable, was mobilized for total war. But this mobilization required time that the intact Pearl Harbor facilities provided. Shipyards accelerated production, aircraft factories operated 24/7, and millions of Americans enlisted or joined the workforce. The preserved Pacific Fleet infrastructure became a force multiplier for this massive effort. By 1943, American industrial production dwarfed Japan's. New Essex-class carriers, each more powerful than any Japanese carrier, began joining the fleet. The Independence-class light carriers provided additional striking power. By war's end, the U.S. Navy had grown into the most powerful maritime force in history. But in December 1941, none of this was certain. The canceled third wave gave America breathing room at a moment when every day mattered. Japanese strategy increasingly focused on defensive operations, trying to preserve the empire they had captured in the war's early months. But American submarines operating from Pearl Harbor's intact facilities began systematically destroying Japanese merchant shipping. By 1944, Japan's economy was strangling.
Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't reach home islands. Troops on Pacific Islands starved, while food rotted in Japanese warehouses without ships to transport it. The carrier battles, Coral Sea, Midway, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, progressively destroyed Japanese naval aviation. Each loss was irreplaceable. Japan lacked the industrial capacity, the trained pilots, and most critically, the fuel to rebuild its carrier force. Meanwhile, carriers multiplied, their aircraft improved, and their pilots gained experience while training in safe waters. The island-hopping campaign from Tarawa to Okinawa was brutal and costly, but it was possible only because the Pacific Fleet could be sustained, supplied, and repaired using facilities that escaped destruction. Each island captured provided another base, another airfield, another stepping stone toward Japan. By 1945, the question was not whether Japan would lose, but how the war would end. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August brought surrender. But even without them, Japan faced starvation and collapse. American submarines had already won the war at sea, strangling the island nation. As historians reflect on Pearl Harbor, the story of the canceled third wave reveals profound truths about warfare, decision-making, and historical contingency. Nagumo's decision, rational from his perspective in the moment, proved strategically catastrophic for Japan. By preserving American infrastructure, he preserved America's ability to strike back. The what-ifs linger hauntingly. What if Wave 3 had launched? What if those oil tanks had exploded, fuel burning for weeks? What if the dry docks had been shattered beyond repair? What if critical machine shops and electrical systems had been destroyed? The Pacific War might have extended years longer. American counteroffensives would have been delayed until new facilities could be built. Japanese expansion would have proceeded further, solidifying their defensive perimeter. The human cost, already staggering at hundreds of thousands dead, would have climbed higher. The canceled third wave also reveals the fog of war, how commanders make decisions with incomplete information under extreme pressure. Nagumo didn't know the carriers' locations. He didn't know how quickly American defenses would recover. He didn't fully grasp how critical the undamaged infrastructure would prove. He made what seemed like a prudent decision to preserve his force, not realizing he was preserving his enemy's capability to strike back. This uncertainty defines warfare. Perfect information rarely exists. Commanders must weigh risks, make judgments, and live with consequences. Sometimes caution wins wars, sometimes it loses them. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese caution inadvertently saved American power. The legacy extends beyond military history. Pearl Harbor galvanized American resolve. Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech united the nation like never before. Isolationism evaporated overnight. Millions volunteered to fight. War production skyrocketed. The attack intended to intimidate America into accepting Japanese expansion, instead awakened a sleeping giant. Today, the story serves as a reminder of historical contingency, how small moments shape large outcomes. One decision, made by one admiral on one morning, altered the trajectory of the world's largest war. History balanced on that choice, and the consequences echoed through decades. The physical scars healed slowly. The USS Arizona remained submerged in Pearl Harbor, a memorial to the 1,177 men still entombed within. Oil still leaks from her ruptured tanks, rising to the surface in iridescent ribbons, the tears of the Arizona, as some call them. December 7, 1941 will forever be remembered for the devastation it wrought. But for those who understand the complete story, it's also a day defined by what was spared, by the decision that wasn't made, by the attack that never came. Waves 1 and Waves 2 left destruction in their wake. 2,403 dead, 1,178 wounded, 8 battleships damaged or destroyed, 188 aircraft obliterated. The toll was staggering, the tragedy immense, the shock profound. But Wave 3, the attack that never happened, preserved the foundation of American Pacific power. It saved the fuel that would power carriers to Midway. It preserved the docks that would repair battle-damaged ships. It left intact the facilities that would support the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. One decision, one moment, one choice made in the chaos of battle. History turned on that moment, on Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo's order to withdraw rather than press the attack. Whether driven by caution, prudence, fear, or strategic calculation, that decision shaped the course of World War II. The third wave that never came saved more than ships and facilities. It saved American capability to project power when it mattered most. It preserved the means of victory at a moment when defeat seemed possible. And in the end, that single decision to not attack proved just as consequential as the decision to attack in the first place. Pearl Harbor remains a day of infamy, a tragedy, and a turning point. But it's also a reminder that in war, as in history, what doesn't happen can matter as much as what does. The story of Wave 3 is the story of the narrow margin between catastrophe and survival, between paralysis and resilience, between prolonged defeat and eventual victory. It's a story that deserves to be remembered, studied, and understood, not just for what happened on that terrible morning, but for what almost happened, and what one decision prevented. The third wave that never came changed everything.